I look for people who constantly want to push themselves and learn new things, and never, who can ask questions and say, I don't know how to do this, even the very senior people. And those have made by far the biggest contributors to the company, the folks who just constantly are, sort of humble enough, and it's actually probably the wrong word. They're confident enough to know they don't know everything.
Does it matter? That's what Adam Elsesser, today's guest, asks himself before engaging in a pursuit to determine if the ends are worthwhile. Amidst a successful career in law, Adam was pulled unexpectedly into the medical field after a casual conversation with his physician friend who would eventually become his business partner. Adam jumped ship, abandoned a hard-earned and successful career as a lawyer, and went after this new idea in the face of his own uncertainty.
I called my wife and said, I don't even know what to tell you, but I'm sitting here like I don't know what to do. And she just started laughing. She's the most extraordinary, supportive woman in the world. And I said, well, I guess I better go out into the hall area and start talking to people.
Since 2004, Adam has been the CEO of Penumbra, a global healthcare company, the second company that he started with that same friend. This one focused on neurological and vascular therapies, and his values of curiosity, persistence, and confidence amidst uncertainty continue to drive him and his team to this day. Adam tells the story and more on this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. This is Ty, your host, and here is Adam Elsesser of Penumbra.
Describe myself and my work are probably two different things.
Yeah.
But focusing on the work part, I'm the founder and the CEO of a company called Penumbra. We started out as a medical device company focused with our first product on treating ischemic stroke. We've now broadened out to a host of other medical conditions, and really have look at ourselves in a much broader capacity.
So medical device for people who have suffered a stroke.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Initially, that was our first product.
Yeah. That's a physical product.
It's a physical product. We make it in the United States and put it in a box and sterilize it,
and then ship it around the world.
Send it around the world. Yeah.
Wow. And how long has that been?
So we started the company in 2004 and have been doing this since then. As I alluded to, we now have products that treat other parts of the body, not just in the brain, but throughout the legs, torso, arms, heart, and more recently we're focusing on using virtual reality for stroke or neuro rehab in a way to sort of go after the patients after they've been treated and give them their best shot at making as full a recovery as possible.
Wow. Important work.
It seems like it. Yeah, it's very profound, and I've had the pleasure, really the honor of meeting a lot of patients that we've treated over the years with our product, and I will tell you that is without a doubt the most satisfying part of what I get to do in my job, and to hear their stories, to hear what could have happened. But for the work that the great people at Penumbra do, it's very emotional.
Yeah, I bet. And how did you initially get into that specific field?
Well, the story of how I got into it is one of those just sort of crazy life moments. I used to be a practicing commercial real estate lawyer in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco area. I had a great practice, I had great law partners, loved what I was doing. My best friend from college at the time, this was way back in the late 90s, is a neurointerventionalist, the type of physician that does catheter work in the brain. And he and I was in New York just on a holiday, and we were having a social dinner. And he started talking about ideas he had for devices and various diseases, which I knew nothing about. And sort of in a maybe sort of snarky way, I said, "Oh, we'll just start a company. It can't be that hard." I wasn't very serious, but the next day he called and asked me when we could meet to start the company that I apparently had promised him in his mind that we would start. So a month later, we started our first company, which was called Smart Therapeutics. We ended up making the first stent to ever go into the brain for treating aneurysms, and ended up selling that company to a much larger company, and stayed for a little bit with them to sort of follow through, and then after that, in 2004, we started Penumbra.
Yeah. And what is a stent?
A stent, it's like a little metal cage. They're most commonly used in the heart to open up arteries and keep them open and patent when there's what's called atherosclerotic plaque in the brain. It could be used that way, but it's the one we designed initially was used sort of to bridge the neck of an aneurysm in the brain.
Wow. And that was your friend. Your friend was a physician, and that was what he saw as an opportunity.
Yeah, it was very early on in this development of the neurovascular field, which he practiced in. There weren't very many products, and he saw lots of opportunity to do things, together, initially starting out, with the first company, but into the second company has been instrumental in that field.
And so the first company, Smart Therapeutics, and you did that for a few years together.
We started in the end of 98, so almost sold it in 2002, so just shy of about 3.5 years.
Gotcha. And then you moved right into Penumbra.
Yeah. Well, a short time we stayed at the company that bought us, and then we moved into Penumbra.
Gotcha. And were you trying to sell it? Were you looking to sell the initial?
So with the first company, it made a lot of sense to sell it. We didn't really know what we were doing. The idea of commercializing and building up a whole commercial enterprise. We just didn't know what that looked like. We, I think, felt pretty absurdly lucky that we had gotten this far by making something that no one else had ever made. Since neither of us are the engineers that did that amazing work. So I think we looked at that as a sort of the right decision at the time. After we learned a lot more and started Penumbra, we had a little bit different mindset. This time we thought, well, maybe we know a lot more. We have a lot more experience, and maybe we should give it a try at building the company out and sort of taking on the commercial part of the work. In large part because we had so many ideas, and the idea of just sort of every few years starting a company, making a product, selling it, doing it again, that gets old. I mean, even though the products matter, you're not really doing new work. It's sort of the same thing, even though the products change. And by doing it the way we're doing it now, we're trying to do something that's pretty rare in the medical device field, which is to sort of scale innovation and be able to work on things that are brand new, that have never been done, medical conditions that no one's really talked about, and do that at a much larger scale, and build a culture around innovation and a team that it thinks that way, that is sort of mindset's a little different than sometimes what happens in the more traditional sort of medical device field.
Gotcha. So based on your learnings from company one, you said, okay, now company two is going to be different because we're going to be able to iterate more, or we're going to have different products, or how is it different?
So, we learned a lot about how the mentality is in sort of the more established traditional medical device field, and we just thought we could do it differently, and that you could go into areas that are really, really hard. Stroke was a perfect example. People told us when we started Penumbra that 50,000 Americans had been enrolled in failed stroke trials in the last 20 years.
Wow.
And they told us that to, sort of warn us that what we were doing was silly. Like it's really going to be hard.
Yeah.
And had the exact opposite effect on us, of course, because that sounded worthwhile. That so many people have tried, and it must mean it's really important, and it is. And so did we think we could be the ones? Of course not. We had some humility in that process, but we felt we should be give it a try. And so now that's really become sort of an obvious thought process. Go into areas that seem really hard, that people haven't done any work in, and going back to our newest thing in neuro rehab, is not been touched in 50, 60, 70 years. I mean, it's pretty barbaric.
Wow.
The amazing occupational therapists and physical therapists who do that work every day, they're brave folks. They're taking on people who are really challenged, who are getting sometimes frustrated and depressed in doing their work, but they're sort of working with them daily. But there's nothing new. There's no innovation. There's no use of some of the science that we all know around neuroplasticity. So we're just taking all that and sort of putting it together. We didn't create the science. We didn't make up the science. We just took what's already known and said we can do something with all of this, and push it forward that other people hadn't yet done. And then with that comes a lot of iteration. On the stroke side, we're on our 8th generation product in about a 11-year cycle, with more coming. That because you just got to get better and better and better.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in the medical device field, people make one product and then they're done. They're sort of, they sell the company, or they feel like that's all they got. Mm-hmm. And in the areas that we're going into, that's just not how it is. You have to just keep trying and trying, and maybe you hope you're good enough to sort of get permission to go again. And that's been our luck so far. But you got to just keep going and going until the products are getting better and better. And by definition, it makes sense. When we started, stroke hadn't been touched and succeeded because it's that hard. And so the odds of you getting it right the first time, or solve it perfectly. You solve it just enough to have people able to continue.
Yeah. So it's a tool that assists the occupational therapist or the folks working in rehab to help them assist with the stroke victim who's trying to get back to a certain level of functionality. And neuroplasticity, to clarify, you'll know the definition better than I. As I understand it, it's the idea that your brain continues to grow. If you practice certain movements, you can relearn things you've forgotten to learn.
Yeah, exactly. So if you just take, a stroke patient who lost mobility of their arm works, their muscles, their ligaments work per se, but the portion of the brain that governed that movement, has been, the technical term is infarcted. And so what you're trying to do is relocate or rewire the brain, and put that function in a different part of the brain. And the idea that you can do that through repetitive movement has been shown, but it's really hard sort of in the real world just to do that. And so what we're trying to do using VR for this new effort is to accelerate that by sort of speeding up, tricking the brain to rewire itself.
Wow. So let's talk about maybe an example of one of the products. Mm-hmm. Let's use the VR as an example. So what does that look like?
So for what we've done, so if it sort of requires two parts to it. There's the hardware, or the headset and the parts of the system that tracks your body, your own avatar, if you will, and then there's the software, the experiences that you've done. So we really had to take on both of those. Mm-hmm. The current hardware that was sort of commercially available in VR wasn't at all appropriate and sort of suitable for the medical arena. So we made our own. We worked with some great partners. Sixth Sense is the main sort of partner of ours who had developed really proprietary and amazing technology to track your own body. And we worked with them to develop a fully mobilized and wireless system that allows you to have what's called full presence. So you can see your own body, immersive VR. So first we had to do that part, and then we had to build our own software team. There's a headset and sensors that track your body and can register exact movements to sort of sub-millimeter accuracy. So that and you store all that and see it all so that you can. Therapists know how well you're doing and can track you and can focus on the parts of your body that need more help than others. But we had to build a whole software team of game designers to develop experiences that were fun and engaging and didn't feel like work, but what exactly the same movements that have been proven to be effective in the real world. And so we worked with OTs and PTs, occupational therapists and physical therapists, to develop all those experiences so that you put those together and then you have this new product.
That's incredible. And you mentioned the iteration, the constant testing, validation. So walk me through how it works. Let's say you come up with this new idea and you have to produce it, and then you have to, how long is the period of testing before you actually then put it into the field?
Well, so the VR is sort of new and it's a little bit different just because it's not going into someone's body. So let's sort of start with more of the traditional medical devices like our original stroke products.
Perfect.
So, here you have a product that is, you're making a small incision in the femoral artery, which is down in your groin. You're snaking the product up from the groin, past the heart, into the neck, and then deep into the brain, sort of typically above the eye, where most ischemic strokes happen. And so, the testing, the process is first you conceive of what it is you're doing, and then you start making prototypes. That's the easiest part. And, no one has ever made an initial prototype that sort of stood the test of time, if you will. So then you start doing basic sort of bench testing and does it even work and could it get there? And from there, once you get past that and say it's there, you start doing a series of other types of tests. And then you sort of start to look at all of what are called design control elements for the FDA and the other regulatory bodies that are required. So that's that takes many, many months. Sometimes it can take depending on the complicated product over a year to do all that. Sometimes there's animal testing required by the FDA, and so there's a host of things that go into doing that.
Wow.
And then you can eventually submit for clearance or approval depending on the kind of product it is. And then once you get it, then you can start to go out in the real world.
Out there.
We have a large R&D department, obviously large manufacturing department, engineering, clinical teams for doing clinical trials. We have regulatory teams. And
then how are you deciding what to pursue?
That's a great question, and I think one of our biggest areas of success has been sort of how that process works at Penumbra. It's a very iterative process. Some companies sort of decide on something and then that's it, no matter what. We move in and out of things a little faster than that, based on what we know and how fast the market changes and what the needs are. And so we have a working list. The head of R&D and I meet, almost every couple of weeks and review the working list, prioritizing certain things, maybe changing. And I remember back in the day when we had one product on that list, of course, because, we were a small little company. Now we have over 20 products that haven't made it above the line, that are staged, that we know we want to work on, but we don't have the bandwidth because the teams are all busy, and we wait until those products are done,
Yep.
and then we can roll some products up. And so it's a fun process.
Yeah, I bet. And you mentioned that they're made in USA.
So the company's based in Northern California, right outside of San Francisco, and that's where all of our manufacturing.
And is that abnormal?
It's very for small companies, it's typical.
Yeah.
But I'm not aware of many companies our size that does that. We do it really for a couple of main reasons. The biggest one is we change our products so often. We improve upon them, if you will, and being able to have manufacturing right there on our campus allows the development teams, the engineers, to be so much more effective and so much more efficient. So we probably gain a 2/3 time. So if a product would typically take 3 years for a company that manufactures it overseas, for us it would take a year.
Yeah, just because everyone's on the same site, same page. Yeah.
So
That's interesting.
It's obviously more expensive from a labor cost standpoint, but well worth it. And our investors have fully understood that and supported that.
Yeah. I want to back up a little.
Yeah, please.
And talking about the transition, you mentioned you were a lawyer, real estate lawyer, and how long had you been doing that?
So I started practicing, I think I'd been doing it about 8 years, give or take.
8 years.
Yeah.
So you established a career and successful
maybe
career.
it was a little longer than 8 years by the time I think it was probably 11 or 12 years maybe by the time I actually left.
So you're well established.
Yeah,
and then you had this dinner with your friend, and then you said, jokingly it sounds like.
Yeah, totally not serious at all.
Yeah.
And then he called the next day to, as I said, to meet. And we started talking about it, and we just sort of went ahead and started this company. I'll be very honest with you. I was a partner in my law firm. I had a mortgage in San Francisco. I had 2 young kids. It was a very irresponsible thing to do. I took a massive pay cut, obviously, in order to do it. And I don't know why. I loved what I wasn't one of those lawyers who was looking to get out of what I did.
Yeah.
I had a great practice. I loved my partners in my law firm and my clients. It was the strangest thing. I can't really answer why I did it. I was just compelled. I just sort of did it. To this day, I never intellectualized it. I never sat down and made lists of pros and cons. I just sort of did it.
You went with it.
And I remember going into some of my partner's office and telling them that I was leaving the firm to do this. And, they were like shocked.
Yeah.
And I just didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
I do remember the first day that I showed up at the new company. I came a little later than we started the company. Sort of got it going a little bit before I showed up full time. And I remember walking in, I had this office as a lawyer, with a view of the San Francisco Bay, and, it was sort of your typical sort of lawyer office in the movies. And I show up to this little teeny ratty space on the other side of the bay, a single-story building. I shared an office because, we were a small company with 2 other people, and I had a metal desk, like an army metal desk. And I had a window, and the window looked out on the dumpster.
Nice.
And I remember sitting there for a few minutes going, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like, I knew what I was supposed to do as a lawyer, but I had no idea. Like, what's my first job? I have no idea. I'd never run a company before.
And then how did you get through that?
Well, I called my wife and said, I don't even know what to tell you, but I'm sitting here like I don't know what to do. And she just started laughing. She's the most extraordinary, supportive woman in the world. And I said, well, I guess I better go out into the hall area and start talking to people.
Yeah, start with people.
Then, it just started to develop.
Yeah.
Go from there.
So were you tasked at that time with leading the charge, or what was your...
Yeah, well, so I was definitely tasked with leading the charge, figuring out, what do we need to do to build the company, make sure that we had enough money to do it. My partner was really the technical guy, at that time, So he was really charged with, what is the product supposed to do?
Yeah.
And I obviously relied on him heavily for that at that time. We've been doing it long enough, that those have blurred a little bit over time. But back in the day, he sort of did the product side, and I made sure the trains ran on time.
And did you give yourself a time frame for how long you're going to see until you
you can't really think that way.
Yeah.
When you do stuff. So I'm a big fan of this concept, and I think a lot of people talk about things. When you go take a chance like this or something as a risk, and they frame it as risk. I don't think that's an accurate way of framing it. Risk, and there's some academic research on this. Risk is a quantifiable thing. You can do the math around the risk. Right. And there's no way what we were doing, you can do that. What we were doing was just uncertain. And as a lawyer, I used to talk about it a lot. So I understood that concept. I would start, I was blessed with having done many weird projects as a lawyer, including one of my favorite ones, which is create a joint library between the city of San Jose and the San Jose State University. It's the largest public library in the West Coast, East Mississippi. It's a 500,000 square foot library.
Cool.
And I represent the university as a lawyer building this concept. Like, how does this all work? We had, it was on state land because it's state university. So the state police had jurisdiction over the libraries, city police didn't. You had 3 different labor unions all doing the same job, trying to coexist. How do you write that up, and sort of a constitution? There was nothing about it that was risk-based. It was all just uncertain. How do you do it? It had never been done ever before. And so I liked that, and I used to talk about uncertainty and being comfortable with not knowing how the story turns out. And everything we've sort of done in the medical device field has that kind of uncertainty to it. We rarely work on products that you can quantify the risk around because they've never been done before. Now we have a few that have some elements of that, but even so, they have other elements of uncertainty. But most of what we do is just purely uncertain. It's never been done, and when it's never been done, you have no idea. Yeah. And so you can't really predict, and you just have to learn to see the signs and the pathways. Is this working? Is it not working? Yeah. Because even when it's not working, will it work? Are these just details? Right. Or these catastrophic roadblocks that tell you you're on? You got to stop. Yeah. I think you just have to teach yourself that and sort of be honest as you can. And we've worked on things we've failed on, right. And we've canceled them. And I don't know if just by working harder and harder we would have succeeded, but you sort of feel it and say, the pathways here feel closed, the gates aren't open,
right.
Right. So let's do something else.
Yeah. You hear, as you mentioned, often about, the analysis or the risk proposal or what have you before going through with something. Yeah. How do you think about a product if it's not from a risk standpoint, but it's the story's uncertain, as you say? What do you do to give yourself the best chance at least finding out if it's going to work?
Yeah. So for us, it's a different question. We don't even ask that question. Does it matter is the first question. And that's the only question that we ask to start. Yeah. And way back in 2004, the answer was simple, which is if we could develop a product that could take out your blood clot while you're having a stroke in a time efficient way to give people who are having a stroke a better chance of, a better recovery or outcome, that's by definition, that matters. Like that's a good thing. Right. How much, how many was a detail, but the concept was obvious. Yeah. And so that's the only question we actually pose.
Is the mission worthwhile?
And if it matters, then you have to, like, are you making progress? Is it, do you know how to do this? And even though there are lots of roadblocks, and God knows there's always going to be roadblocks, does it matter? And I mean, it's a simple thing. You know, I could have gone back to my law firm after the first company, and I had made a little money. They would have been more than happy to take me back. And then I just kept saying, you know, I'd rather fail and tell my kids, hey, I tried to do this. You know, I tried to bend the curve for stroke patients, but I couldn't do it. That didn't embarrass me. That wasn't failure to me.
Yeah.
That was success. And so it just became an obvious thing. And so that's sort of how we see everything. And, you know, again, we're not going to do everything we set out to do. We're not going to always succeed. We had a good example sort of recently. We had tried working on a sort of a part of a product that we thought would enhance our stroke system, our original product, twice before. And both times it failed. We just couldn't do it. We couldn't design it. We tried, we spent a lot of money, and we canceled them, not once, but twice. And about a year and a half ago, actually about a year ago, two of the most senior people in the R&D department came to me and said, we'd like to try this again. And I was very skeptical, like, okay, what do we know differently?
Yeah.
And they were pretty passionate and compelling. So I said, all right, give it a shot. And 4 months later, one of the directors of R&D came in with a young engineer and just handed me, you know, a product, and it was it. They had done it. It was extraordinary. I mean, just extraordinary. It's something I didn't expect to be able to ever hold in my hands, because we knew what we did, you know, things we didn't know in the other times we tried it. So, you know, you never know.
Right.
And I'm not always right. I could have easily said no. Would have been a mistake.
Right. Yeah. And you couldn't have got to version 3 without having done 1 and 2.
No, of course not.
Yeah. Well, I imagine as an employee or, you know, colleague, that's a nice mentality to have permeating the room.
Yeah.
Does the work matter?
Yeah, I think almost everyone who comes to the company comes because of that.
Yeah.
It is very clear, you know, that that is what we care about. We don't make products that look like a lot of other people's products and then sort of fight for market share.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, people make products that look like ours, so we do have to fight for market share.
Right.
But we typically don't follow, you know, which becomes more of a sort of a financial situation, more than something that matters to us.
Yeah. And would you have any advice based on what you've learned for someone starting out on a new endeavor, whether it's a business or a project or something they've never done before or something challenging?
There are a lot of things, you know, I've learned, you know, so to be able to sort of give a short answer to that question is hard.
Yeah.
I think the biggest advice, and the thing that I talk about really with everyone still at the company is the moment you think you know what you're doing, you know, and you think you're sort of good at something, you should retire, because you're already behind. You know, I look for people who constantly want to push themselves and learn new things, and never, you know, who can ask questions and say, I don't know how to do this. You know, even very senior people, I do it all the time. I don't know what I'm doing. You know, I'm never run a company like this. I'm making it up every day. And so if I can do that, other people should be able to do that.
Yeah.
And those have made by far the biggest contributors to the company. The folks who just constantly are, you know, sort of humble enough, you know, and it's actually probably the wrong word. They're confident enough to know they don't know everything. You know, confidence is a funny thing. You know, sometimes the people use the term the wrong way in my mind. You know, the person or the young manager or leader who thinks they know their job really well, they sometimes can be described as confident. Typically I look at those as the most insecure people, and the confident people are the ones who are constantly asking, how do I learn? How do I do more?
Yeah.
And I would just keep that, my only advice to anyone is to keep, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, is just to keep that mentality, and life will be a lot more rich and interesting.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, confidence in yourself in uncertainty.
Yeah.
Confidence in your own ignorance and ability to learn.
No one, that's the perfect, every boss wants an employee like that.
Yeah.
Every company will, do well by that. Every project, that's who, no one wants a boss who tells them what to do and they're wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah. Seriously. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's been really fun to learn about it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I don't think the general public necessarily knows a lot about healthcare in general, or healthcare devices, or even thinks about the fact that there are physical items that go into the bodies of people who have had a stroke that help them out.
Yeah, well, it's good not to, because there's some tough things out there, but there are a lot of companies, not just ours, who are doing incredibly noble work to try to keep us all as healthy as possible. So it's an amazing field.
Yeah, truly, and always going to be a new puzzle to solve in that frontier
until we're all perfectly healthy.
Yeah, and the VR, that's fascinating to think that the simulation that could be done through a video game or a visual to help someone through their rehabilitation exercises could expedite recovery dramatically.
Yeah. We'll have to prove that, but our early sort of impressions and the reactions we're getting, are pretty compelling, and we're pretty excited about it.
That's so cool. And how many people are with Penumbra now on your team?
In the whole company, 2,400, something like that.
Oh, wow.
California, it's the main location, but we have offices, a couple of offices in Europe, offices in Australia, and South America as well. So
cool. Well, again, Adam, thanks.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Good to have you on, and looking forward to spreading the word.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks, Aaron Mason and Caitlin Watkins, for your contributions to this episode. Thanks as well to A Nave Especial for the music. This is Ty, your host. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll catch you soon with more episodes of the Jalapeno Podcast. Take care.